How are organisms still living in this earth? It is because of a process called as reproduction. So in potato, buds usually arise from the tuber. In banana, buds arise from the rhizome. And in ginger, buds arise from the nodes. So binary means two. One organism divides to form two organisms. So that is binary fission. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to today's session on chapter 1 of 2nd PUC, that is Reproduction in Organisms. I am Dr. Divya, Biology Faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So we all know that organisms tend to reproduce, right, to move on to their next generation. And we also know that organisms have a certain lifespan to live, and after that they enter into the senescence or the death stage. So in today's session, let us discuss about what is lifespan and what are the different lifespan of an organism and how organisms reproduce, or the different modes of reproduction in the organism. So to begin with, let us study with what is lifespan. So we all know that each organism has a certain lifespan, and the lifespan actually doesn't depend on their size. That is true, right? Because some of the organisms might be very huge, but their lifespan can be only for a minimum number of period. So therefore, the size of an organism doesn't determine what the lifespan of an organism is. And also there is no immortal organism except for some single-celled organism. So immortal means they will never die. Are there any organisms that never die? No. Majority of the organisms, they are immortal, means they die after a certain period of time or once their lifespan comes to an end. But apart from that, there are some single-celled organisms or some unicellular organisms which are immortal or capable of living permanently. But in spite of immortality, organisms have lived on this earth for several thousands of years. And how come? Because I told you the lifespan of an organism is just for few years or few months or few days. But in spite of that, how are organisms still living in this earth? It is because of a process called as reproduction. So reproduction is the one. So therefore, say for example, butterfly. A butterfly just lives for few days. But if it lives only for few days, saying that don't you find butterflies now? You find butterflies everywhere, right? But how come? It is because they are capable of reproducing. They are capable of producing new offsprings. So this is about the lifespan. So talking about the lifespan of different organisms, here we have put some examples. Elephant. So elephant, the lifespan of elephant is about 50 years. And rose, it is 10 years. And crocodile, it is 60 years. Now, if you remember, in the previous slide, I had told you the lifespan of an organism doesn't depend on the size. The elephant is way too huge than the crocodile, right? But can you see that the crocodile can live for 60 years, but the elephant lives only for 50 years. The lifespan of elephant is 50 years. Talking about dog. So dog 10 to 13 years. Now here again rose. Rose is a plant, very fragile, but in spite of that it is very small, but in spite of that they live for 10 years. The rose plant can live for 10 years. Dogs are huge, bigger than the roses, and animal, though they belong to the animal group, they live almost equal to that of how many years the rose lived. Next, talking about butterfly. So butterfly lives only for about 7 days or 3 weeks, that is 1 to 3 weeks. Cow, it can live about 18 to 22 years. Next, fruit fly, it can live about 40 to 50 days. Fruit flies are very tiny, that is Drosophila melanogaster. They are very tiny. And butterflies are bigger than the fruit flies, but the lifespan of the fruit fly is greater than that of the butterfly. Next, talking about banyan tree. Banyan trees can live for 200 years and the tortoise can live for 100 to 150 years. Again, imagine the elephant size and the tortoise size, a lot of difference, right? But how many years the tortoise can live? 100 to 150 years, more than year of the elephant. So that is why the size actually doesn't decide how many years an organism is going to live. It is actually the nature that decides it. So this is about the lifespan of an organism. Next, talking about reproduction. So I had told you, though some organisms, they perish after a certain period of time because they have only such amount of lifespan to live. But how come even today these organisms exist? It is because of a method of reproduction. So let us look into what reproduction is. So reproduction is a biological process in which the animals give rise to young ones similar to itself. That is true, right? We are almost similar. There is a difference between identical and similarity. We are not identical. If we are identical, say for example, are we identical to our parents? No, but we are similar to our parents, right? We have some characteristic from our parents, but we are not exact copies of our parents. So therefore, reproduction is a biological process in which organisms, they give rise to young ones or progenies or offsprings which are similar to their parents. And how an organism reproduce, it mainly depends on the habitat of the organism, the internal physiology of the organism, and there are various other factors. So reproduction depends on, say for example, some of the organisms, they are capable of internal reproduction. Some of them are, the reproduction is external, that is fertilization itself is external. So in such conditions, the method of reproduction in an organism can vary according to the habitat in which they are living. Say for example, hydra, they reproduce by budding. There are some fungi which reproduce by producing spores, right? Conidia or spores. So therefore, depending on their physiological behavior, the habitat in which they live, reproduction and also various other factors, reproduction can be of different types. So based on how the organisms participate in reproduction, it is of two types. One is asexual method of reproduction and sexual method of reproduction. So asexual method of reproduction, the word asexual means here two gametes are not involved. That is, the male and the female gametes are not involved here. Say for example, I'll tell you by taking the example of human being. So in human being, we exhibit sexual form of reproduction, right? Wherein the male sperm is involved and the female egg is involved. But in asexual form of reproduction, nothing like the male gamete and the female gamete are involved here. So how do they reproduce in asexual method and how in sexual method? We shall look into it. So first, talking about asexual reproduction. So a single parent is involved in producing the offspring. Why single parent? Because I told you asexual method of reproduction is a kind of reproduction wherein the male and the female gametes are not involved. Therefore, there is no organism like a male and a female. Whatever organism is there, they are capable of reproducing, because if male is there, then they are not capable of reproducing. So therefore, in nature itself, there is no differentiation between the male and the female. All the organisms which exhibit asexual method of reproduction are capable of reproducing. So here, offsprings are exact copies of the parent. And what are the exact copies of parents called as? They are called as clones. Now here the question comes, why are they exact copies of their parents? I told you in sexual reproduction, we get characters both from the father and from the mother, right? Because both are involved here in reproduction. So that is why we don't look exactly like our parents. We are not clones. But here, a male parent and a female parent is not involved. And only one parent is involved, therefore, and the reproduction is asexual method. Therefore, the offspring that is produced will be exact photocopies of their parent. They look exactly similar to their parents. So that is why they are called as clones. So therefore, the offsprings that are produced by asexual reproduction are clones of their parents. And asexual reproduction usually occurs by cell division. And based on that, there are different types of, based on how the organisms reproduce, the asexual reproduction is of different types. We have binary fission. We'll study each of these one by one. Binary fission, budding, then sporulation, fragmentation, vegetative propagation, and bud formation. So let us look into each of these one by one. So these are the different ways asexual reproduction is exhibited by different organisms. So first, talking about binary fission. Here the word itself says fission. Fusion means to join something, right? But fission is to break something. Here the breakage of an organism is occurring. So binary means two. One organism divides to form two organisms. So that is binary fission. Now the number has increased. Therefore, it is a form of reproduction. But are male and female gametes involved here? No. Therefore, it is an asexual method of reproduction. So here unicellular organisms reproduce by binary fission. So one of the best example for unicellular organism that we can take off is amoeba. So amoeba usually reproduce by binary fission. Here the cell of the amoeba, it divides into two halves and then each half grows into an adult. So if you can see here, we have an parent amoeba. So this is, it's neither a male or a female, no differentiation. So what this parent amoeba will undergo? They will undergo division. You can see the division of the nucleus, and finally they'll divide to form two cells. So two offsprings are formed here. So this is a kind of asexual reproduction and it is called as binary fission. Why binary fission? The cells have divided into two. Binary means two. Fission means dividing, breaking. So that is why it is called as binary fission. And this kind of binary fission is exhibited not only by amoeba but also by one more unicellular organism which is called as paramecium. So this was about binary fission. Next, talking about one more form of asexual reproduction, which is budding. So here in budding, the division is unequal and small buds are produced. So these buds, they are initially or at the time they are produced, they are attached to the parent and later on they get separated from the parent. And after separation, individually they will mature into new individuals. For example, yeast. So yeast exhibits budding. Amoeba exhibits binary fission. So budding, if you can see here, we have the adult yeast here. So I'll call it as the adult yeast. So this adult yeast has produced a bud. Now this bud will remain initially it will remain. Later on, they'll just get separated and they will form a new yeast cell. They'll form a offspring. Now this parent will remain, this offspring will remain. The parent again will undergo budding, the offspring again will undergo budding, therefore increasing the population or increasing the number. So this is one best example for budding exhibited by yeast, that is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Next, one more form of asexual reproduction is sporulation. So usually fungi, they actually produce sporulation. Apart from that, amoeba is also capable of sporulating. So say for example, under unfavorable conditions, the amoeba enters into a dormant state. So unfavorable condition, maybe the temperature is not suitable, maybe the availability of water is not enough for the amoeba to reproduce. So in such conditions, what happens is the amoeba, it will enter into a dormant stage. So dormant stage means it is the resting stage of an organism wherein the organism will not undergo any process. It will not undergo reproduction or any process it will not undergo. Why? Because the conditions are not favorable. Only when the conditions are favorable, they will break their dormancy and they will start to reproduce. So in such times, how can this particular organism remain dormant until they reproduce? Let us look into. So here what happens in this particular stages when the conditions are unfavorable, the amoeba will enter into a dormant stage or a resting stage. At that time, the amoeba, it will withdraw its pseudopodia. So what is its pseudopodia? The false feet of amoeba, right? So it will withdraw its pseudopodia and then it will start secreting a 3-layered hard covering around itself, which is called as encystation. So under dormant condition or when the conditions are unfavorable, the amoeba enters into a dormant stage or a resting stage wherein it will lose or it will withdraw its pseudopodia and it will start developing or secreting layers around itself, and that particular process called as encystation. So what happens to amoeba under dormant condition? They enter into encystation phase. So what happens? Now it is encysted, it is covered. So because it is covered by a 3-layered, it is protected when the conditions are unfavorable. Now when the conditions become favorable or when normal conditions come back, what happens to the amoeba we shall look into. So when favorable conditions return, the encysted amoeba that is there, it will break its dormancy and it will again undergo binary fission many times to produce many pseudopodiospores. So these pseudopodiospores which are there, the cyst will burst out. So what encystation had occurred, right? So if you can see here, these are the different layers, that is 3 layers will get formed on the around the amoeba when during the dormant stage. When will they become dormant? When the conditions are unfavorable, and this particular process of formation of 3 layers is called as encystation. Now the amoeba is in the encystation stage. When the favorable conditions arise, they will break open their dormancy, the 3 layers will get broken and the amoeba will start to produce pseudopodiospores. Those pseudopodiospores will undergo again binary fission and they will multiply to form new organisms. That is how they will undergo binary fission. So, or they'll undergo, this is a process called as sporulation. Now, because they do not have a pseudopodia, they are called as a spore. Now, can you see here? These are pseudopodiospores. Pseudopodiospores. Why? Because they have the false feet, they have the pseudopodia. But this under dormant condition, can you see here? Our pseudopodia is there? No. What they have done? They have withdrawn the pseudopodia and they have formed 3 layers around them. So the cyst wall that is there, that is the 3-layered wall that is there, it will burst out and the spores will get released into the surrounding medium and they grow into tiny amoeba. This process is called as the sporulation. So amoeba can undergo binary fission and they can undergo sporulation, and that spores can undergo binary fission and form new amoeba. So this is how sporulation occurs. So not just in amoeba we can find sporulation, but sporulation also occurs in majority of the fungi as well. Even in algae, in fungi also we can find sporulation occurring, and also in sponges. So we shall look into them. So the members of the kingdom fungi and some simple plants such as algae, they reproduce through zoospores. So some of the fungi, they reproduce by producing zoospores. So these are zoospores. So zoospores are small kidney-shaped structures with flagella, and they are the ones that actually require a lot of water medium. So zoospores are one kind of spores that are produced. Next, penicillium, which is also a fungi. So algae reproduce by zoospores. Even some of the fungi also reproduce by zoospore. But there is one fungi which is called as penicillium that reproduce by producing conidia. So if you can see there here, they produce conidia. So this is an example for algae which produces zoospores. Then we have penicillium that produces conidia. Then we have sponge that produces gemmules. So sponges, they reproduce by producing spore-like structures called as gemmules. So this is how different forms of sporulations are produced for the organism to reproduce and enter into the next generation. So next example is vegetative propagation. So the organisms can reproduce by vegetative propagation, which is also a form of sexual reproduction. So vegetative propagation is usually seen in plants. So let us study by taking some of the examples. So plants reproduce by producing certain vegetative propagules such as runner, rhizome, sucker, tuber, offset and bulbs. So these propagules are the ones that actually give rise to new offsprings. Say for example, here we have ginger. So ginger, how do they reproduce? What is their vegetative propagation method? They actually reproduce by rhizomes. So rhizomes are the vegetative propagules in ginger that actually help in reproduction or formation of new organisms. Next, talking about runners. So one of the best examples for runners that we can take off is strawberry. So if you can see here, strawberry, they produce roots here, the main plant, and the branches that run along the ground, they will again start to produce roots here. Again, they will continue. The stem part that runs along the ground will continue. It will start to produce roots. Again, it will continue. It will start to produce roots. Can you imagine from one parent plant, the vegetative because of vegetative propagation, 3 plants got obtained. So they are like runners. Even grasses are also one of the best examples for runners. Next, talking about one more example for the suckers. So suckers, here we have taken the example of a plant wherein you can see the branching of the plant will take place. So the branch that is there which touches the ground, it will grow back, it will develop roots and it will grow into a new plantlet. So that is the difference between a runner and a sucker. So these are the different forms of reproduction. So we shall take various examples to study about these. So first form of vegetative propagation, which is a form of asexual reproduction, is the bud formation. So bud formation, say for example in plants such as potato, then in sugarcane, banana, ginger, dahlia, etc., buds are formed. So if you can see here, you can see in potato, the vegetative propagule is tuber here, wherein eyes are formed on the tuber and they actually help in the propagation. Even in the sugarcane also, if you can see here in the internodal region or in the internodal region, you can find the bud formation. And apart from that, there are other plants also which develop buds. Say for example, we have bryophyllum which produces the leaf buds. So in potato, buds usually arise from the tuber. In banana, buds arise from the rhizome. And in ginger, buds arise from the nodes. So this is how the budding occurs in the case of, so bud formation can be, but what is a vegetative propagule? Now you should not get confused between the method of reproduction and the vegetative propagule. So here the method of reproduction is bud formation, but what is a vegetative propagule? In the case of potato, the vegetative propagule is tuber. In that tuber, buds are formed. Those buds will develop into new plantlets. Likewise, we have in the case of banana, the vegetative propagule is the rhizome. The rhizome develops buds and those buds develop into new plantlets. Similarly, in ginger also rhizome is the vegetative propagule. These vegetative propagule produce buds and these buds develop into new plantlets. In bryophyllum also adventitious buds are formed. So these are the buds that are formed in bryophyllum. Can you see here? And they develop into new plantlets. So in the margin of the leaf, you can find the bud formation which are called as leaf buds in the case of bryophyllum. So in bryophyllum, adventitious buds will arise from the notches that are present at the margin of the leaves. Means if notches are this one. So if the leaf of bryophyllum is like this, exactly in the notches, the buds will get produced. So that is how the vegetative propagule in bryophyllum is the leaf and the vegetative propagation is the formation of the leaf buds. So that is about the bud formation in the case of vegetative propagation. So these are the different methods of vegetative propagation. So we studied how rhizomes are formed, that is rhizomes are one of the example for vegetative propagation. We have suckers, stolon, runners, then tubers, then the formation of leaf buds. So all these are the different vegetative propagules. So vegetative propagules are usually seen in plants, whereas other organisms, they undergo asexual form of reproduction by budding, fragmentation. So in fragmentation, what happens? The organism divides into very small fragments, and each of those fragments will develop into new organism. So this is how, and in hydro also buds are produced. So that is how in other organisms, unicellular organisms also exhibit asexual method of reproduction, and multicellular organism like the plants also exhibit asexual method of reproduction. So this is about asexual method of reproduction. So moving on further, in the next session, we shall discuss about what is sexual reproduction. So far we studied about what is asexual reproduction. So in the next session, we shall look into what is sexual reproduction and what are the events that are involved in sexual reproduction. So I hope you understood this session very well. So we shall meet again in the coming session with new topics of the same chapter. So see you in the next session. Thank you.